Hey everybody, and welcome to this month's Spotlight on Interview. So this is where we go in depth with a member of the Purple Space community of disability ERG and network leaders, and we explore the structures and the leadership traits that are enabling them to build disability confidence from the inside out in their organizations. I'm Brendan, Director of Strategy and Networkology here at Purple Space. This month I'm joined by Josh Gurley, who is from the Coca-Cola company and the leader of the Disability Business Resource Group. And today we're going to explore this month's leadership theme, which is all about allyship. So, hey, Josh, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, Brendan, thank you for having me. And in addition to today, just thanks for everything you do to work with us and help guide us on our path to disability inclusion. Great, you're a great partner.
Yeah, well, look, we've been working with each other for a little while now, and it's not just you, the bunch of colleagues that we're enjoying working with. There's lots of great things happening at the Coca-Cola company. So glad we could make this happen. And we're talking about allyship today, but before we dive into that topic, let's tell us a bit about yourself. Where are you dialing in from? How long have you been with the Coca-Cola company? What do you do for a day job?
Yeah. So I live here in Atlanta, Georgia, in Southeast United States, and I've been with Coke for about three and a half years now. But the cool thing is I grew up in the Atlanta area, and while I've moved around different cities, different states in the Southeast U.S., Atlanta's always been home. So since our global headquarters is here, I felt really fortunate to move back home for a role here at Coke, and now I can be here both with family to support and be supported, frankly, as well as to work and hopefully have a long, successful career. My day job, what they pay me to do, what my LinkedIn profile would tell you is that I work in digital strategy, trying to figure out what it looks like for us to sell more beverages online and meet consumer needs across the globe. And as we say, be within a click's reach desire of anybody that wants one of our products. But I think more importantly in this conversation, what that affords me the opportunity to do, as you alluded to, is to be part of our leadership team for the Disability Inclusion Network. So that's disability for anybody not familiar. It's kind of our play on words for disability to focus on the things that people can do versus the disability side of it.
Yeah, it's one of the more imaginative. We see lots of different BRG names around disability. It's one of the more kind of eye-catching ones. So we'll dive into the disability group and your role in that, but like a couple of sentences on the group. How long has it been going? Broadly, what's the purpose of the disability BRG?
Yeah, so we are the newest, the youngest, if you will, of all the inclusion networks. Like many large organizations, we have a Black inclusion network or Black employee network, we call it, Hispanic, Asian, LGBTQ, women's. So as we started going down this path, just before I joined Coke, really like 4 or 5 years ago now, we started the Disability Inclusion Network. That back then it was a BRG semantics. We changed to Inclusion Network now, but the idea is for us to be advocates and thought leaders at the Coca-Cola company for people with disabilities and the community overall. And really, we break that down into people with disabilities, their employees, their families, as well as our consumers at large. Because I believe that we are in this unique position, maybe a few other companies in the world, that can truly empower and inspire people the way that we do, with the way that we market to folks, the reach of our products, the brand recognition and brand love that we have. That affords us, I think, the opportunity to do what our mission is, which is to refresh the world and make a difference in both of these scenarios. So my work in disability is that second half of that equation. It's the make a difference side. And my day job, I hope we get to refresh the world a little bit as well.
Yeah, awesome. Interesting. Listen to you here talk about the I guess the relative progress of the disability inclusion network relative to some of the other groups, and we see that play out right across our community. The disability inclusion networks, BRGs, often last to the party, but the growth is huge. The progress is rapid because of leaders like yourself.
Yeah. What's really interesting is we get to learn from folks that have been on this maturity journey and hopefully shorten the curve to where we want to be from an inclusion standpoint for the disability community. Because you think about, whether it's affirmative action or equality for women, their rights, all of these things that have, especially here in the U.S., taken decades or longer in some cases. We go, hey, now that disability inclusion is rising to the top as a national priority, how do we shorten the timeline to do what's right and not have to rely on some major national catastrophe to do the right thing, and instead just go do the right thing and follow the blueprint for these other brilliant leaders that have followed, that've gone ahead of us.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I guess one of the benefits of going last is you can learn from what works, but also the mistakes of others. And I suppose that leads us on to our topic, really, because we're talking about allies in sort of every respect of the word today. So, other ERG leaders from within your company certainly fall into that category of the broad group of allies that you can tap into. So let's dive into this topic. So this month, it is all about the power of allies, and in our view, our experience of our community is that allies are one of the most important stakeholder groups when it comes to building a more inclusive world for people with disabilities. And we define an ally as anybody who doesn't identify themselves as having a disability or a long-term condition, but aligns themselves to our agenda out of personal interest. So there may be lots of reasons for becoming an ally, Josh, and I know you identify as an ally yourself. So can you tell us a bit about your journey towards becoming an ally to our community?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, mostly because I think that gives me the opportunity to talk about some of my favorite people in my life. And to that point, I don't have a known disability, so my experience in this space started in a one-to-one, very personal relationship-wise. So back in high school, I'm sure there were many other people that I just, like most folks, weren't really thinking about the disability community. So while it was likely all around us, we know it's about 1 in 4, 1 in 5, depending on your geography. It wasn't like personal to me until I met my mother-in-law back in high school. And so, I was dating this girl, and part of the package deal is of anybody that we fall in love with is their families. And so I got to meet her mom, who about 30 or so years ago was in a car accident, and leaving that accident, she became a paraplegic, and has since done and had a very successful and accomplished life. Part of why my bias is to think about what people can do is inspired by her. But it was that personal relationship where before I got to know her, but all while she was living in the wheelchair, she was a decorated world record holder on the U.S. disabled water ski team. She rows in regattas, here regionally. She's an artist and owns her own business. She became the first female disabled pilot. Like, the list goes on and on. She's very accomplished. The things that she has done define her. So I found that really fascinating because, my day-to-day interactions with her, it just became second nature, and this one-to-one support that you would expect out of any family member, right? Like, we're going out to dinner, and it's opening a door the way any gentleman would, but it may be also, hey, there's a ramp here, so it's a gentle nudge to make it easier to go up, right? Or transferring out of a car, or when you're traveling, thinking about the little things, right? So allyship to me started in a one-to-one format. And then it transitioned, because it's a very visible side of the disability space, right? You move over, and my eyes were opened even further about a decade ago, and my mom was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And so very non-visible in many cases, and until it progresses, potentially becomes very visible. But for my mom's, it's a brain side. I won't get into all the science, but it's all non-visible at this point. It hasn't affected motor skills. It in fact affects cognition and memory loss and things like that, but not necessarily. If you don't know her, you wouldn't know that this strong, independent, powerful businesswoman that I grew up knowing, one of my biggest role models, definitely the person that's shaped me to be who I am more than anybody else in the world, is now struggling on a day-to-day basis because it's non-visible, right? And you have to ask her, is today a good day or a bad day? And so again, it's another one of those one-to-one support mechanisms where I never thought, until joining Coke and seeing this ability, seeing the opportunity to just be a member, then become a leader, and now be the president of the group, is to say, I can take these one-to-one experiences, pair that with the skills that I'm gaining in the corporate world, the network that we have, and actually make a difference at scale. And that became really exciting to me to think about how to take that next step and really make a difference.
Yeah, that's a really interesting background in terms of your routine. And I guess what that highlights is that, I guess the ubiquity of disability. So, whether you identify as having a disability or not, you are never that far away because it's just part of the human condition, right? It affects all of us in one way or another, and it certainly will at some point or another. So, I have dyslexia, but family, just like yours, is full of people with all kinds of conditions. Yeah, that's really interesting route in.
And many of which we don't know, right? You think about all the people you work with. Brendan, I would never define you by your dyslexia. It's something that we've talked about, but it's something that unless you disclose, and many of the people that work on our team, we don't know. And so, how do you work with somebody most effectively, thinking about some of these things that are seen or unseen, if we're not asking the questions, and if we're not, demonstrating the empathy to just understand where someone's coming from? It's a huge gap, and it's something that we've all got to play a part in improving.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing as well that you trigger a thought, Josh, just in terms of the breadth of this of our community, in terms of the range of different types of conditions and disability. Huge difference between dyslexia and MS, for example. And we often hear folks from within the community, so people who identify as having a disability, will often say, hey, look, it's possible to be both part of the community and an ally to the community just because of the difference in experiences.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I think, and that's part of that maturity curve we talked about with other networks, other marginalized communities. We're starting to get to this place where I believe any group in this journey starts by having conversations with themselves. But as we mature, a sign of maturity is that you start seeing folks become allies externally. And so part of that starts with the disability community feeling like they can be an ally and part of the community. And then you bring in allies to really start rounding it out and amplifying the message. So you're not just talking to your, in this case, 1 in 4 humans that have a disability. Now you're opening it up to the other 3 in 4 that may not, to be able to really further expand the impact and scale of the difference that you can make.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was your kind of route in, and how you became interested, and on a kind of one-to-one basis as you described it, and then thinking about, well, how can I do that at scale in your professional setting? So a good number of our community of disability ERG network leaders identify as having a disability, probably about 80%, and around 20% are like non-disabled allies. So tell us about your route to becoming a member of the BRG, but then moving into the leadership role.
Yeah. So it connects back to the story on the one-to-one basis, and timing is really interesting in what God puts in our lives, because about 6 months into me working at Coca-Cola, my mother-in-law are talking, and she says, "Hey, remember that art show I told you about happening at Coke when you're interviewing?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Well, that's next month." I was like, "Well, tell me more about it. Now that I work here, it's a real thing. I need to know what this is." And what was really cool is that this ability at the time was hosting, for here in the U.S., we celebrate National Disability Employment Awareness Month every October. And so for October, the group reserved this high traffic main hallway that connects our 2 biggest buildings here in our Atlanta global headquarters. And all of the building was going to be decorated by artists that are part of the disability community. So I mentioned she was a business owner, local artist, and she was selected to be one of those artists featured here at our office. There was a happy hour event to kick off the art exhibit. So I invited her and my wife and my daughter to come in. My daughter was like 6 months old at the time, to come in and see the office, see where Dad works, but then also celebrate her inclusion in this really high visible opportunity. And that was where I kind of met the group. And going in, I knew about it. I clicked the button that said join when we were going through onboarding at Coke, and I'm like, I'll join all the networks, but I don't know where I'm going to really make a difference. But I got to meet the humans behind it, and I started like reducing the stigma of all of these people are experts in the space, right? Like I picture a bunch of Brendans in a room that know a whole bunch. They're strategists. They eat, sleep, and breathe the space. And what I came to realize in that event was you've got folks from finance and HR and legal, and they just care. They're passionate people about the space. They're advocates. They're allies, like we're talking about. And their life, in most cases, is impacted by disabilities that may be a daughter, a son, a parent, a friend, themselves, but they're not experts, right? Like they don't get paid to be disability experts. So that helped reduce the stigma. Not long later, they just were looking for hands. They said, "Hey, can anybody just help us do our International Day of Persons with Disabilities event that we're going to put on?" And I thought, I'll carry some tables. Maybe I can help. Like, I bet you can help more than that. So, this flywheel started, this compound effect really started to get in. And after landing a few successful projects as part of the team, the leader at the time, who was, his name's Enzo, he now leads a disability organization externally, came to me and said, "Hey, look, I think you could transition and mature our group a little bit based on just the visibility of not having a guy in a chair as the person who leads the organization. So if you're open to it, would like to offer you to at least interview for the role as I step down." And there's some hesitation, right? I mean, straight white male without a disability now being thrust into this diversity and inclusion conversation, like, whoa, elephant in the room, right? But having those conversations with Enzo, looking around at my peers and helping to realize that I have a network that I can lean on. I don't have to be the expert based on this team that I have, and I've got a passionate team to support. Like, I'm set up for success here. Let's go make a difference. So we took that leap. I've been in the role for a little over 2 years now, leading the Inclusion Network, and I'm just really proud of the opportunity to do it, but of the progress that we're making and trying to keep this flywheel going.
Yeah, it was really interesting listening to you. I mean, one of the things I was questioning in my mind, which you kind of answered actually, was whether you did have any reservations, coming in as an ally, and particularly, if the people that know of Enzo as a kind of visible leader in this space, whether you had any reservations. Was interesting that that was something that it sounded like he had almost kind of thought of that and saw it as potentially a positive.
Yeah, I've been blessed to be surrounded by great leaders who think differently than me, and he's definitely one of those people that inspired a different thought process. And so after a few conversations, the hesitation there actually quickly went from what I look like and what my background is to, like, am I qualified, right? And so we go back to that whole expert versus advocate conversation. And when he goes down that path, I think about, man, I've been at the Coke for 6 months. I don't have a deep network here yet to go really spark change. I've never worked in this space. Can I really make a difference? Or you sure there's not someone else that's right? And so that whole, like, self-doubt, imposter syndrome kind of comes in, right? And all these things start colliding, and you realize, like, anybody can make a difference. The bar is at a very reachable level to come in and just try, and then people give you all the benefit of the doubt as long as you're putting your best foot forward. And then all of your other skills that you have can be applied to the space. And that's the exciting part, is seeing the results that come that validate, like, hey, we're on the right track, which is really cool.
Yeah, you really the great kind of the way that you phrase that. I suppose the dichotomy or the balance between being an expert and an advocate, and one of the common traits that we see in, like, the really impactful disability network leaders is about being confident, speaking authentically about the experiences of employees with disability. So clearly you have that from your personal background. Like, how do you manage that from the employee, like the Coke experience, that you come in new ERG leader, but kind of relatively new employee as well? So how do you kind of learn about the experience of your colleagues?
Yeah. This is one that, I mean, even in this conversation, right? Like, I can't tell you probably the things that I'll say incorrectly. I'm learning, I'm trying, right? So I think there are a couple of things that I try to be very intentional about, so that as I learn, as I'm exposed to these things, as my own journey in the disability community progresses and matures, I can look back and be proud of at least the effort and the behaviors that I put in so that I could be successful. So a couple things come to mind. One is, I try to be very transparent about what I can and can't add from a value standpoint. So, I've got skills where I've worked in data and analytics. I've been in sales. I've done marketing. I'm in digital now. I've got skills that transfer that can amplify good behaviors if known where to point them. But I'm very transparent that I'm not the expert. I've probably already said it 4 times here, in the sense that, like, I have to be very adamant about that, so that no one comes in thinking that this ability is going to be that person. I actually don't want that expectation of my team overall, because they all have day jobs, and I think that expectation would burn them out. So I want that to be very clear, which leads to kind of the next most important thing, which is relying on a network, right? So even at the outset, just thanking you for this time in your work is very genuine, because if we're not going to be the experts, we need somebody who will be, right? And in this case, if we're passionate folks that understand how to get things done at Coca-Cola, I need groups like Purple Space and and others to say, well, have you thought about this priority? Have you used this resource? Have you met this person, so that it can inspire and provide some direction and structure around the direction in which we head? Because if we go in the wrong direction with this passionate team, we can go way off to the right side, right? Like, we're going to move fast in one direction or another. We need groups like yours to help us go in the right direction and make a positive impact. And then go into these internal teams that say, if it's a marketing opportunity, if it's a talent development opportunity, getting with the right organization to then make this part of their job, part of their KPIs, so that then they can apply their expertise in that given discipline, using our passion to put the two together to actually make change, right? So that network is huge. And then ultimately at the end of the day, I think about also like understanding and being aware of what gaps I don't have and being curious. So if I understand where I want to improve, what I don't know, what areas are blind spots that are important enough, I can kind of map those out and continue learning and try to ask for forgiveness on areas that I don't know, but also commit to trying to get better over time. So that's the kind of behavioral approach that I try to take in terms of uh, improving in this space, knowing that I'm going to make mistakes. Uh, but at the end of the day, I think, and maybe this is kind of the key to the whole answer, is if if I'm not going in and speaking confidently, or if I'm not confident enough and I'm passing up opportunities to speak on behalf of the community and make a difference in the community, then no one's talking about it. And we have a team of leaders that applies to our whole group, right? But if we're not doing it, then we're back where we started. So we either have to go in full speed and be confident, knowing that we're not going to be perfect, but we're going to be moving things in the right direction, or just don't exist, right? Because we'll just be at the same place that we are, whether we do or don't, if we're hesitant the whole time.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting listening to you describe, I guess, essentially what commonly understood as the growth mindset, I suppose. You know, you're talking about gaps, being open about gaps in knowledge and seeing it as a learning experience, relying on others to kind of supplement, you know, areas where you're less developed. So it's a trait that we see a lot in some of our community.
Yeah, so growth mindset's we're a big corporation, so we've all like been pushed towards like reading Carol Dweck's work and understanding what growth mindset means. But there's a new concept that has recently kind of caught my eye, and the idea of the scout mindset kind of builds on what you're talking about there. And it's, if I can just probably totally butcher the idea because it hasn't been like corporately trained and pushed on us yet. The idea is not necessarily going into the conversation thinking you have all the right answers, but it's going into the conversation hoping that you'll walk out with the right answers. So it's pursuit of being correct and understanding what's right, and agreeing with others, not the pursuit of going in saying I am right and here's my opinion, right? So I'm scouting for the right answers, the right priorities in this space, not necessarily saying I know how to do it and let's go push the agenda on these internal and external teams. We can probably work together and figure it out with the scout mindset applied there.
You can, listening to you describe it, you can immediately hear how that's going to be a strong method for ensuring that what you're communicating, the decisions you're making are made in the best interests of the community, given that it's, as we were saying before, it's such a diverse community with a range of views and lived experience. So yeah, I like that. Okay, I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that model as we go. You were talking about mistakes as well, and I suppose one of the greatest challenges for our allies is that fear of getting things wrong. That might be using the wrong language, you might be making assumptions, saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, and you kind of touched on that. But I just wondered, like, how do you? So you're open. Like, one of the things that strikes me is you're open to that as a possibility, and it doesn't deter you, because you have, whether it's growth mindset or the scout approach, like you have approaches that help you to kind of gather the information and find the right answers. But I just wondered, how do you as a leader, like how do you create an environment where other people are just as comfortable in making a mistake?
Yeah, it's a great question, and what I hang on to as you ask that is like open to the possibility of making a mistake. I would reframe personally to say I'm certain that I will, and so by just accepting that and kind of taking a self-assessment, saying, are we good with that? We are? Okay, then go, because you're going to. But I think it comes down to we talk about this a lot in like our day jobs, which is just assuming positive intent, like it's just a very fundamental way to build culture and relationship, right? Is this idea of knowing that you will make mistakes, other people will as well, but people see that you're trying. And if you're trying and you're making progress, then people will give you a lot more space and grace and actually don't mind educating you in the space, right? Like some people want in our case, like people want people first language, others don't like people first language. I've got to ask them to understand what makes sense to them and then adapt over time as we all mature and come to some kind of common meeting ground. But until then, I'm gonna use people first language with somebody that doesn't necessarily want to be addressed that way or referred to or identify that way, right? I've got to learn and I've got to listen. So we try to apply that whole kind of mindset, knowing that we're going to be anxious if we overthink that too much. But it goes back to the idea of if I don't speak up, then there will be a gap that is not addressed by anybody, and we have skills that can be applied here. Overall, like that cost of inaction is just too high. So I think when we go out and I think about this a lot, we're obviously living in two different countries, so you may travel a good bit. We love to travel internationally. My favorite trip I ever took was a trip that my wife and I we got to go see different parts of Italy, and I loved trying my hardest to speak Italian with like my American Southern accent. It was far from perfect. It was awful. But what you noticed is as you went out to dinner, your server appreciated you giving that effort, right? As you got in a taxi, your driver appreciated you trying to give it. The concierge at the resort, all these things, right? They didn't go, gosh, you tried, and that sounds nothing like the way we say it, or you use the wrong pronoun, or you use it just said like, you're trying, right? And so while we go through and try in this space to use the right language, assume positive intent, and then move in the right direction, people give you a lot of space there to do the right thing.
Yeah. I hear you. Like, it's a few things going off in my mind as you're speaking, Josh. Like the language analogy is a great analogy. Like you're describing it from the perspective of the person kind of hearing what you're saying and hearing the mistakes. But as a Brit living in Spain, forever learning and improving on that front. As the speaker, as the person saying the stuff, like learning a language is a great way to get comfortable making mistakes, because you're saying the wrong thing. Not just like, oh, every now and again, it's every time you open your mouth, you're saying the wrong. So you kind of get comfortable fast saying the wrong thing, and you recognize like people's goodwill to you and the way that that's received in a positive way. And the other thing you were talking about, that kind of assumption of positive intent as well, and just there's a phrase that really resonated. I was reading a book called The Promises of Giants by the organizational psychologist John Amici. So shout out to John and that book. Recommend it. But he talks about, he uses this phrase, I think it's something around like the approaching things with a sense of benign ignorance and enthusiastic curiosity will essentially kind of like carry you a long way as an ally to all people. And it kind of feels like that's what you're describing there.
Yeah, I love the way that he puts that. Probably going to sell some books off of that blurb too. I think that that's a great way. That curiosity is a difference maker, right? Because we don't know. The unfortunate part of the whole scenario is there is so much more room on the upside than there is downside, right? So if one person makes a mistake here and there, they get forgiven. The majority of the time, we're moving things in the right direction. So it even goes back to your question about you kind of combining that, the way that the psychologists kind of phrase that with the way that we try to lead folks is to go, net, we're going to make a big difference here. There are going to be some bumps. But if you're okay with a couple bumps, but we're going to go to a really cool destination, then that's the inspirational kind of where we're headed that aligns us all to say, let's give it a shot. I think the other thing that stands out is, we're talking about just constructs and behaviors. This concept of servant leadership, and when you think about being curious and that sense of enthusiasm to be able to approach it that way, and the way that he framed that, I think about what are we trying to accomplish? If I'm sitting back so worried about what other people are thinking about me as the leader and judging me, am I really worried about me, or am I worried about the end destination, which is leading in a way that I'm trying to serve a community, a culture, people overall. And if I can apply that servant leader mindset, then it's this really cool flywheel that says the downside of you correcting me and that little hit to my pride is inconsequential compared to the life-changing work that comes with hiring people with disabilities, creating new products and packages that meet the needs of people with disabilities, creating events that inspire people, building awareness. I mean, already forgotten about the one or two mistakes, because what you can do to serve others is so huge, and that permeates in all of our relationships, right? Like you can see that in your spousal relationship, with your kids, with your parents, with your friends. The more you want to serve other people, the less you're concerned about the downsides. And so I think that applies to our need to not want to make mistakes, but it becomes overcome really quickly if you have the authentic servant leadership mindset.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk about servant leadership, as an effective approach in this space. We see time and time again that a real strong sense of customer is something that is a defining characteristic in some of the best ERG leaders that we meet.
Yeah, and that's how I would kind of define those two things, right? I think sense of customer, if you're doing it right, my opinion is that servant leadership mindset. And it says, I want to serve you. You are my customer. You're my stakeholder. My success is defined by your happiness and progress that you've made, right? So like back in my sales days, like we grew because of things that we accomplished together, and I had a good year if what I did met the needs of my customer, which then in turn grew my business overall and whatever company I've worked with in those stages. So it's the same thing in interpersonal relationships, right? If we can just readjust our mind from that selfish kind of self-serving, what's in it for me mindset, instead say, what can I do for you, right? Like, how can I actually help you? The way that your organization helps us is, it's not about like, well, are you guys going to do this for us in return? We know that from a standpoint of benevolence, it's all going to come back. That the more you help me, the more I want to help you. The more I want to join your organization, promote you all, and do in what you're doing. The more I want to bring you in to help us. It's this positive. Go back to the buzzword of flywheel, right? That compounds and says, the best way to serve me is to serve other people and know that it's going to come back. But also, if I'm doing it authentically, I'm not worried about the return. I'm worried about making sure that other people are happy, and you end up in a better spot that way. I've seen it happen in all aspects of life.
Yeah, no, agree. One, just kind of maybe shifting to another type of ally that that is relevant to this conversation is, as a disability ERG leader, you will know that disability impacts on so many parts of the business. It's not just hiring or HR, it's product development, it's your digital, it's your built environment, it's your procurement, it's everywhere. So that means that you will have a day job, your leadership team will have their day jobs, and as you say, it might be finance, it might be digital strategy, but it's unlikely that you're going to have folks who have functional responsibility for all of these areas where disability will have an impact. So I just wondered, like, do you have a view in terms of who are the most important allies that a disability inclusion network leader needs across a business?
Absolutely. I think so I'll share who ours are, but I think before getting into who we lean in heavily with and who we rely heavily on, I think first it's going to be different for every organization. So, and that's not a cop out. I will answer the question for us, right? But everybody is in a different place on their disability inclusion maturity curve. Where we were 3 or 4 years ago, very different organizations that we'd want to work with internally, right? We were in the mode of driving awareness, inspiring people. It was feel good, make people care with their hearts so that eventually they'll care with their brains kind of mindset. As we've matured and started to move into, all right, people get that this is important. Now we have to create real results that drive that value back for the organization. Now we get into more specific business functions aligned to our priorities. So again, first understand where you are in your maturity curve. Then I think the funnel continues by saying, so then what are those key priorities? What's realistic, but then what are we going to go focus on out of that full kind of universe? And so we at Coke have said our priorities are, and really this is consistent across all inclusion networks, we want to focus on community, talent, and business. And that looks very different for our Black employee network versus our disability or our disability inclusion network, et cetera, right? But the initiatives underneath may look different, but we know that for those three things, if I'm going to go improve talent, for example, I've got to be lockstep with our people services organization, our HR business partners, our workplace folks and accommodations, our benefits team, all these groups that in their day jobs they have accountability for, back to servant leadership, to serve our associates, both bringing in the right talent with our HR teams. How do we help them pair with the right organizations to source talent, build new programs for internships or mentorships, right? Same thing with accommodations and benefits, just showing them that there are opportunities and then embedding that into their role so that now it's not this extra thing someone's doing. We've done our job to inspire and provide some direction. They now can do what they do best and they do really well, which is their job. And now I'm making disability community a part of that. So for talent, it's those groups. For marketing, you think about, we have phenomenal brand teams, brands that have more global reach than any brand in the world. Those teams should be thinking about this space, and we're talking to them. We have commercial teams that think about the way that we go to market, how our products are accessed and the accessibility of them, all these things that we've got to work with our commercial teams on, and the way that they're packaged and labeled and distributed, right? For our community pillar, I think about our internal and external communications teams and groups like that help us to increase our reach and drive inspiration. And then overall, right, I think about leadership, and this kind of is probably the one that can go across any organization, regardless of your prioritization or digital maturity, is you have to have leaders on board, because someone's not going to change their priorities regardless of how much you hit them in the heart, from our experience, unless you've changed the heart and mind and made it a priority at the top. So our CEO signed the Valuable 500 a couple of years ago, and that was one of our first sparks that said, I've got a slide with his pretty face and this one quote, and I use that all the time internally to say, he's on board. Are you? Right? Let's start there. Our executive sponsor is the North America Chief of HR. We have her on board to say this is a priority if needed to remove barriers. And then we have a great diversity inclusion team that's global that helps us to kind of work with you all, align on strategy, work with priorities. So those internal stakeholders, some are very specific to inspiring and providing direction. Others internally are very specific to a function and a priority. But if you don't have that funnel, then it's kind of aimless and no one really knows what they can do to help you.
Yeah. It's really interesting listening to you talk, Josh. I suppose the thing that jumps out there is you're just reminding us of the importance of like clarity of purpose. Like that's always, it's such an obvious thing, but it can often get missed, like when you're busy trying to run a network off the side of your desk, to be really crystal clear about your purpose. But once you are clear about your purpose, then you know what you're trying to do, which means then you know who you need to work with in order to achieve what you want to achieve. So yeah, that's great that you have that clarity, the strategic vision that then dictates like these are the folks in the business that we need on our side.
Yeah, and it's ever changing, right? I mean, like, I hope that 2 years from now, when we're having this conversation, that I would give you some similar answers and say that we're really embedded with these teams that I mentioned that we're kind of just starting with now. But others, I'd like to say we've opened the door to things like we're not doing a ton hands-on with our digital workplace team, for example, deep in the throes of technology. It's like these areas where you just take an old Eisenhower matrix and go like, where do I have the impact and effort? Which quadrant does this fit in? And priorities will shift overall and over time. And as they get into that right quadrant, that you go, I have the right to win in this space, and I know enough to give direction, that clarity of purpose. All right, it's time, right? And that's going to shift. And we have to constantly stay on top of what is our strategy, what is our purpose, recheck ourselves, and then go dive deep so that other people come along the journey. And to your point, like the whole point of this conversation is about allies. We're going to build that. And we've been surprised at how many folks go, man, we've been watching what you're doing from afar. Really cool to know that we can actually make a difference in this space too, right? Like I've got deja vu to me 3 years ago when someone else goes, oh, I can embed that in my job. Happy to, right? Like, why not? That's the right thing to do. We have a lot of great people that work here. They want to support, they want to do the right thing. To your point on clarity of purpose, they just don't know that it can be a part of their job or how to bring it to life. And our passion, your direction, things like that really help us make a difference in a tangible way.
Yeah. All right. Last question, Josh. So maybe you could close this out by giving your top 3 tips for becoming or being an effective ally to our community, so for people with disabilities.
Yeah, sure. So you're gonna have to go buy my book for this. No, I'm just kidding. Don't have one, probably won't write one. One copy sold, it'd be to myself, or maybe 2 to my mom. So I think when I think about the 3 areas, I would double down on one of the things we talked about earlier, in the sense of kind of the 3 buckets, the way that I just personally approach it. Because I think if I have 3 tips and I'm not living them, then they're probably not super authentic. So I'll go back, I'll double down on the idea of servant leadership as number 1. I think understanding what you're trying to accomplish, but most importantly, making sure that you're authentically doing that for someone else gives you that curiosity to want to support a community, do it benevolently, in a way that can actually make a difference, knowing that ultimately you'll reach your goals if you're serving other people, is my belief. So aspirationally being a servant leader is number 1. 2, I think relying on the network. We've talked a lot about our networks today. I am an advocate and an ally for the disability community. I am not an expert. I think that's like 6th or 7th time that I've brought that up here in this quick chat. But by being that clear about it, and then understanding that I've got folks like you, I've got internal stakeholders, and everybody can play their role in mapping out how we go down this journey together, then that relieves the pressure on me to be able to overcome the stigma that everybody in this space knows so much, and instead begin kind of engaging this compound effect of making a difference, but everybody playing a small part instead of one person carrying this massive burden, right? And I've got a great leadership team, great experts externally that help us do that. And then the third, I know I'm like, each of these buckets have like 1A, 1B, 1C. So forgive me as trying to make this sound like 3 things. The third, I would though go back to our growth and scout mindset conversation. I think if you are willing to learn and willing to put in the effort and employ that growth mindset you mentioned, in combination with a scout mindset that says, and I don't know it all, but I'm willing to go into this conversation open-minded so that we walk away understanding where to go next or what the right thing is together. It allows us to put our pride aside. It allows us to really be productive and collaborative in a way that step changes how we employ that network effect and how we're servant leaders, right? I think all 3 of those work in tandem to be able to really make a difference. Because at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer in the idea of the compound effect. And I kind of mentioned this as well in the sense that, and it can be positive or negative. So if we go in and we make a small positive step, and several people do consistently, right? Those positive steps turn into something really, really great and really life-changing for other humans out there. The downside is that over time in our past, a lot of negative action, or in this case, inaction, has led to our current status quo. And so that compound effect is pretty detrimental for a lot of people, where the world is not designed for people with physical disabilities, right? We don't have the right accessibility for people with non-visible disabilities to be able to do some of the things that they can do to highlight their strengths. And so we've gotten ourselves into this place because of a negative effect of the compound effect. Why don't we just turn that on its head with really small actions from each of us in the right direction, on the right things, using our network, scout and growth mindset, with a servant leadership, genuine approach. And I think if you employ those things, it doesn't take much. The bar is at a very reasonable level, and we're all just trying our best at the end of the day. So you get a lot of grace if you come help out in this space.
Yeah, Josh, that's a great way to close. Completely hear you. Small steps, but the way that you describe that approach, I mean, that's actionable, right? So the people listening to this, in terms of that openness to learn, that desire and willingness to serve, like, these are great models that people can use. I'm looking forward to, we'll be discussing the content of this conversation in our upcoming peer group learning sessions with other members of the BRG leadership community. So it's awesome. We're at time here. So Josh, look, I want to thank you for coming on. I want to thank you for your allyship, for your leadership. And to the Purple Space community of disability ERG network leaders, those of you watching and listening, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, we'll be diving into this topic, as I say, in all of August's peer group learning sessions. So check out the website. You can book on to those sessions now, and we'll see you next month.
Great. Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, everybody.